I'm Kate Moyle. I am a psychosexual and relationship therapist and host of the Sexual Wellness Sessions podcast. Now, what I hear a lot of time from people is that post-cancer, cancer treatment, diagnosis, the entire process is that sex is something that is left out of the conversation. And we have this two-way relationship because patients don't know who or what to ask, where to access information and help, and medical professionals and those in cancer care teams are not necessarily equipped to have the conversations themselves. Overarching this, as a society, as a culture, we all find it pretty difficult to talk about sex. So all of that is sitting within the context of an overriding difficulty with this as a topic. So something that I wanted to talk about today is this approach called the 4 T's. Now this came from Professor Domeena Renshaw, who is a really famous psychiatrist and sex and relationships expert. And the 4 T's that she discussed were time, trust, talk, and touch. And I think that they are really, really relevant here for when we've been through a massive period of change, such as something like cancer, diagnosis, and treatment. And what we know is that all of this stuff isn't happening in a vacuum. So it's impossible for us to separate out what's going on for us around our treatment, around our diagnosis, around our care, and what's going on in our relationship. Cancer doesn't happen in a vacuum, and neither does sex. So that's the first thing that is really important to remember, is that we see this kind of symbiotic bi-directional relationship where one thing is impacting the other. And also we don't have a conversation in general about how sex changes. Sex changing in itself is not a bad thing. It's something that happens across various different stages and phases of our lives, of our relationships. But it's something that we don't talk about. And often it's something that we don't know how to address then when there is a big change. So the first thing when we're talking about this, the first T, is time. Making the time to have this conversation. Talking to your partner about putting the time aside and thinking about the right time. So perhaps 2 or 3 days after chemo isn't exactly the right time to sit and have a conversation about sex. If it's post-surgery, the immediate time after that isn't going to be great. Post-diagnosis or a really difficult appointment. Thinking about the timing of things is really important, but also making time. We see that for general couples, for general life, in general, even without the extra additional elements of health struggles, is that intentionally putting time aside is one of the most successful elements of relationships. That it's what couples tell us that they are doing, who are reporting better levels of satisfaction. We think that it's quite unsexy and unromantic to be scheduling this in, but actually what we are doing is we are prioritizing our relationship and intentionally putting aside that time and effort to have the conversation. So time is one thing, putting aside the time, but also thinking about the right time. And in terms of the right time, that's something that only you and your partner will know. And that might be a conversation in itself. When do you think a good time for us to talk about this would be? Or do you think that you would be ready to talk about this later in the week? Or do you think that you'll be feeling up to us having this conversation after we'd discussed that with your doctor, or we talked about the side effects of this? So that is the first T. The second T is trust. And we know that when we have a cancer diagnosis, that trust in our bodies and ourselves is actually something that we might really start to struggle with. Our body has done something that we weren't planning it to do, that we feel in some way let down, is a phrase that a lot of people describe. So we might be feeling really disconnected from our bodies, unsure of our bodies, untrusting of our bodies. And that can be because we don't know what's necessarily been going on, or we are struggling with symptoms that might be showing up in a variety of different ways. So trusting ourselves is one thing and being in that situation, but also trusting our partners. So this again leads into the first T, which is talking, setting up these kind of parameters or boundaries. What helps you to help each other? So saying, we can't do this part of sex at the moment, or let's just pick an example, intercourse is not there at the moment, but I would like to trust that we're not going to push that. We've been told it's not a good idea. What can we try? What can we work on together? What would feel good for both of us? And trusting that as a couple, we can hold that using phrases like for now or for the time being, not never, because we don't know what things are going to look like in, let's say, 6 months' time. But even that reframing of language can be something that's quite helpful for couples to think about. The other thing is that we're often internalizing what's going on for us. We might find it more difficult to trust our partners or to trust that what they're saying is genuine, because when we are internalizing our negative thoughts, we're kind of going through this process of not externalizing. So we are almost our own worst enemy. We can ruminate, we can think about all of these worst case scenarios that we hear. Fears like, what if my partner leaves me, or I'm not the partner that they signed up for anymore, or this is going to have a really negative impact on our relationship and then my partner will not want to be in this relationship anymore. When we internalize these things, we are creating the anxiety and the stress internally within ourselves without checking it out with anyone. And actually that can leak into our relationship in lots of ways. So having that conversation with our partners, checking out, saying, do you know what I'm really scared of here? Or I have this fear here. And this is something that podcast guests have explained to me and people I've spoken to have explained to me is, on top of everything else I was going through, I had these fears and they were causing me to not trust what was going on around me, or to suddenly worry about something or trusting something which I never worried about before. Talking is really important. We see that for general couples that mind reading is something that we do a lot in relationships. And what I mean by that is that we often think that we know what our partner is thinking before they even get a chance to tell us. We assume that we know what they're going to say, so we don't actually listen to what their answer is. And that is an important thing here, and it relates actually to the previous T, because those assumptions can be really dangerous, but the only way that we cannot assume is if we clarify. Now, the only way that we can clarify is if we check it out with each other. For couples starting to talk about sex and relationships might be something that, even though they've been together for years, they've never done, and it can feel really intimidating and it can feel really challenging and quite anxiety provoking. So starting with the positives, these are the things that I love about our relationship, these are the things that I want us to be able to do together, these are the really happy memories that I have of things that we were doing. Wouldn't it be nice for us to do something like that again? And tackling the challenges that you are currently facing together rather than individually is something. So positioning the challenge in the challenge itself rather than in the two of you. So creating this united approach, but understanding each other, your fears, your anxieties, is going to be one of the things that creates a really strong bridge between you for tackling what's going on. So learning how to communicate, taking time to communicate, asking each other open questions. How do you feel about that? Did I understand that correctly? What I took you saying that to mean was this. Did I get that wrong? So really simple questioning, basically over questioning, as strange as that sounds, can be a really useful tool here. The fourth T is touch. So we can perhaps be in a different place with our sex lives. We might feel like we don't want our partner to touch our body in the same way as before. Touch might be uncomfortable in a way that it wasn't before for us, and certain parts of our body that previously might have been sexual might feel completely desexualized now. We might feel a real lack of body confidence or a real self-consciousness of our body. And there are obviously physical things that might be going on, whether it's surgery, scarring, stoma bags. There are so many ways that our bodies can change when we're going through the process of cancer and cancer treatment, and it's a really important thing to acknowledge that those changes might also affect how we see and feel about ourselves. So being able to say to your partner, this used to feel really good for me, I used to really enjoy this, but I don't actually anymore, or currently this is making me feel really uncomfortable, currently this is not something that I want to do. What I would really like is for us to be able to touch, be able to have intimacy, be able to reach out to one another, but for me to know that there isn't the pressure there for it having to go towards sex. Because when sex becomes an anxiety point or a difficulty, what we tend to do is we pull away from all the things that might lead to sex, because we are fearful of disappointing our partners or of leading our partners on. And actually this lack of intimacy, touch, connection, breakdown in those little bridges, what we call the sexual currency between couples, is one of the things that causes a lot of distress and a lot of disconnection, and again, a lot of assumptions. So if you are able to say, these are the things that we are able to do, could I show you what type of touch I like? Is it something as simple as starting to do things like little moments like holding hands? The Gottmans, who are worldwide kind of relationship experts and leaders in the relationship space, talk about things like a 6-second kiss and a 10-second hug, a kiss with potential. And what we are doing is we are creating these little moments of affection, creating the chance for desire to occur, and also remodeling what sex might look like for you as a couple. There is no reason, just because you can't have a type of sex which you might normally have, that you have to have a breakdown of physical intimacy, connection and touch. It might just be that you need to work out a new way to do that. There are plenty of ways for you to build sensuality into your relationship, and that can make you feel good. We know that touch releases oxytocin, that hugging is something that can make us feel closer and bonded. And so it might be that you are working out ways to explore each other's bodies, which might be different to how you've done it before. I hope that has been helpful, a whistle-stop tour through the 4 T's and things that you can easily implement and action into your relationship and your life.